I live in that stretch of trees in between Tallahassee and Pensacola. There's
Right.
literally nothing here. You could say there's Bonifay, Chipley, Defeniak Springs. It's a bunch of towns nobody's ever heard of out here.
So before COVID, what do people do there? Like, what's there to do?
uh, Most people would go down towards Panama City or if
Okay.
they wanted to do anything at all. Um,
But you're out there, you're remote.
yeah, I am remote. Very.
Are you a hunter?
Not as much as I used to be, and it really is that comedy routine. I don't like getting up early. That's really why I don't. But
And what is like what is hunting there? Is it like birds of some kind?
in this area, you can get anything from, let's see, you could get duck, deer, boar.
Okay.
That's all relatively common if you wanted to go out and do it. But again, I haven't done, it's been at least 10 years since I did anything like that.
I actually would be interested in going hunting, but I am very supportive of the concept of hunting. I don't eat industrial farmed animals, but I would eat anything that was caught wild. It's just this sort of this psychological thing for me that's part of the food chain, but our industrial agriculture is not part of the food chain. And it's also mean and inhumane. So I have, ethical considerations, but I would totally go hunting. And it's just, I've never been in a situation where I would have to be with someone who really knew what they were doing. And it would have to be the right circumstance.
Right. We've got like there in this area in particular because it's also there's a lot of poverty around here, and for a lot of people it's a hobby, but it's also 100 pounds of meat in the freezer. There's a balance there that exists. Yes, it's a hobby, but it's also partly for survival out
Yeah.
here still.
Yeah. Which that's the reason. It makes sense to me to hunt for food. Like I don't have a problem with that. So, which is a perfect segue into one of my favorite topics with you is about guns, because nobody knows more about like seriously in such a reasonable manner. And one of these populations of people down here that I deal with regularly are the Moms Demand Action group. I'm sure you're familiar with these women.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just, obviously it's a very single issue, for them, and they just are not reasonable. And they're just not reasonable. Like you can't say, well, this is the information. No, banning assault weapons, got to ban assault weapons, got to ban assault weapons. That's all they're like motivated to do. And it's very frustrating. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. So you understand what I'm talking about. And especially being somebody who ran as a Democrat and is generally progressive, this is something where I'm very libertarian, and I really do have this libertarian streak to me. And I do believe in our constitutional rights. So it matters to me. But what is the best way to convince people seriously without watching 3 episodes of the banning assault weapons trio that's just it's not a reasonable response to the problem?
Generally when you're dealing with people like that, you are dealing with people who aren't, you're right, it's not about reason. They have a fear and they want their fear addressed. So I tend to use a series of questions. The first being, do you believe that Trump is a fascist? Yes. You almost always get a yes, or he's a proto-fascist or whatever. Then go to, do you believe there are camps? Yes. Do you think only the government should have guns? And you'll get a pause for a split second. And that split second is where you recommend that they look into the issue a little further. But you've got to get it right in that little window.
So it's using fear in the other direction, essentially.
Really, that's the only way. That's the only way I've ever had success. Yeah, I'm sure there is another method, but I haven't found it.
I try to recommend the 3-part Bo series on the banning assault weapons because it was extremely informative. I always thought of that as it just seemed like almost catchphrasey Band-Aid type of approach to something that's clearly so much more massive. And I'm not just going to say, oh, it's a mental illness problem, but just,
Right.
and also we're just too far gone. That's just the idea of banning something that exists in the amount that it exists. It's just, I just don't see the point.
Right. I've tried like, because I had somebody from Australia ask, and I actually broke out the numbers. And because I say that a lot, I'm like, we have enough guns to arm every man, woman, and child in the United States. When I'm talking about it, I say that. And I realized that people overseas did not realize that was literal. I'm like, no, we have 360 million people. We have 420 million guns. We have enough for everybody. And you can see the look on their face of like, yeah, it's an issue. We're going to have to work on this for a while.
How do you ban that? It's just so, it's just not the feasible solution. We're too far gone. That's really how I feel about it. And that any attempts to do that will be met, like you had said, with just equally worse problems. Like it's not going to fix the problem.
Right. And we don't have any standard approach to it. I've got a friend who was talking about moving out here from California, moving to Florida, and she owns a pistol, and she was asking like what she would need to do to have it okay in Florida, because she lives in California where there are a lot of restrictions. I'm like, nothing. She's like, well, who do I need to report it to? I'm like, no, but we don't even have registration here. like you just bring it in and you've moved here. That's it. You should get a driver's license pretty soon at some point, but I don't really even know that that's required. And it's just, it's interesting to see that side of it. Because she was talking about moving out here and then buying a rifle, and she was asking what the requirements are. I'm like, they're still at Walmart. You're not a felon in Florida. You can go buy it. It's really that simple. As soon as you move here and you're a resident.
I mean, I've gone, when I was campaigning, we did a lot of small business canvassing, and I would always go into the pawn shops, go into the gun shops, whatever. Truthfully, I'm walking a strip mall. I'm walking the strip mall. I don't care. And I had a volunteer on my campaign at one point. He's like, oh, you don't want to go in there. That's the gun shop. And I'm like, what? I totally go in there and talk to them. But that's exactly who we need to talk with. But I definitely see people in there filling out all sorts of forms. Like there's definitely like people filling out forms and paperwork when I've gone into places and I've seen people procuring firearms.
Right. In Florida, you still have the background check. And basically they make sure you're not a felon, that you don't have, I want to say a mental adjudication, a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they check for, but this literally gets done before you leave the store. It's a quick process, but there is paperwork involved with it, but it's all for the feds, and the state does not keep a registry. So if you buy a rifle and you want to, sell it to your producer 2 weeks later, there's no law against it. Like there's nothing stopping that, and there's no reporting that needs to take place as far as I know. But again, I'm 10 years out of the community when it comes to
right.
Stuff
but
like
it's so woefully not properly regulated. And that is something that I've always thought, like, I am never in favor of banning things. I'm just not, that's not something I do, but I am fully supportive of any and all regulations regarding safety issues that affect public health and well-being, just like we regulate cars. Like I don't have, that's not a problem to me. But and something else that was brought to my attention is to make a clear distinction between supporting the Second Amendment and supporting the NRA. And,
right.
and that's a huge distinction. But I think to a lot of those groups, and I know like the Moms Demand Action, like I do think to them, those things are pretty synonymous. They're very black and white about how they see it. It's like no guns, no talking about guns, no kids playing with guns, like toy guns, no guns.
If you're running into people that are that partisan about it, you might actually have some success showing them the SRA, the Socialist Rifle Association, or Gun Owners of America, or all of these Second Amendment groups that exist specifically because they really don't like the NRA. because there's a lot that the NRA does that not just does it upset your average liberal, it upsets gun owners. You know, there was a time when the NRA was actually supposed to represent gun owners, and then it's kind of morphed into this thing that tends to represent the interest of gun manufacturers rather than the owner.
Right. I mean, I remember, I grew up with, my dad had guns in the house. I grew up having a very, very strong, respect for the firearm. I remember him taking me to the gun range when I was 13 years old and just showing me what that was about and how to use it. And then I was never to touch it, like that was it. And never did I do so. It wouldn't have occurred to me. Like, I think the proper level of respect and slight fear, respect for the weapon, fear of my father, in terms of if I were to like get in that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like and this is something where I definitely am going to catch crap from the lefties on that, because I'm not I'm not anti-gun.
Right. I mean, well, and I think that if we could ever get, again, it's one of those things of speaking the language. And right now, the anti-gun crowd and the pro-gun crowd, they are not speaking the same language.
No.
When it comes to like when when it comes to safety and security, most gun owners, most of the Second Amendment crowd, most of the pro-gun crowd, they're like, yes, lock your guns, for God's sakes, lock up your weapons. What's wrong with you? You definitely need to do this. And they would oppose it just because of the shall not be infringed, but you are not going to get massive protests about having to lock up your firearm.
There will always be people that complain about every little regulation. There's going to be people that complain about every little regulation. But by and large, most responsible gun owners are supportive of regulation of firearms. It's just not, like my dad from when I was growing up, he's always like, it always was weird that there's not like a national registry of everybody who has this. And, why is there not a record of that? This is, we register our cars.
Right. So it's funny because the reason we don't have one is twofold. One, the innate paranoia that exists within a lot of right-wing groups. And second, the federal government didn't want us to have them. One of the reasons that the the Second Amendment exists in its original intent was so the average citizen could back up the U.S. military in the event of an invasion. If you go back to a lot of the propaganda movies of the 1980s, like Red Dawn, for example, there's actually a scene in it where the Russians go in and they take the paperwork from inside the gun shop and they use that to track down and see who has a gun. So there's this idea that we don't want a list and that gun owners don't want their name on a list because of this. The funny part about it is most of the gun owners who believe this are members of the NRA and voluntarily put their name on a list.
That's ironic.
It is. I mean, it's like there are a lot of things that when people sign up for the NRA, they don't realize what they're doing. But
well, they think it has to do with they're just, Second Amendment, but have you ever tried to ask any of those people about their other amendments, their other rights? Because where were they when we were losing 4, 5, and 6? Because that's right. Always very interesting to me. It's like, what you have the right to protect yourself from government tyranny, but they've already taken a lot of your rights away. So, what's the gun going to protect you from at this point?
Right. And if they can take all of your rights with the exception of your right to own a firearm, they don't need to take the firearm.
Exactly.
Because they know you're not going to fight back.
Exactly. There's nothing to do. Right. So I think that's a big part of it. I think a lot of people just don't realize, and it's not as sexy as the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment gets everybody all, gets everybody all riled up on every side. They get very defensive about everything on that. It's personal. It's very personal.
It is.